Hi, I'm Steve. I'm one of RUSU's student rights officers. I'm an advocate who works for the elected student representatives. And my colleagues and I are here to help students sort out problems with the university. This video is here to give you information about making a successful appeal against exclusion. Before I start talking about that, let me do the right thing and acknowledge that RUSU acknowledges the people of Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded land we conduct the business of the university. RUSU respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders, past and present. And RUSU also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where you may be. Now, first thing, there's a resource pack on our website which will help you know how to set out your case and which is really worth your while working through. Making an exclusion appeal is complicated and stressful, but we've got lots of experience and we can help you, particularly with finalising your written case. Your appeal does have to be in writing, and it's got to be along with a copy of the correct form, which you can download from RMIT's website. Your appeal has to be lodged within 20 working days, which means weekdays, not counting weekends and public holidays, from the email notifying you that you're formally being excluded. Now, your appeal has to be supported with evidence, and it must clearly show how it meets what are called the grounds of appeal. And I'll talk about those in a minute. Let me say, many students worry about their English expression and whether it's going to be good enough, whether their problems will be considered by RMIT, or just how to seem professional. Those things are not the secret to making a successful appeal. The reason for that is that RMIT's process is based on a simple assumption, and that's that you've been given warnings and time to improve, so continuing to fail shows that you aren't able to complete your program, which makes it reasonable and appropriate to exclude you. And that makes logic the secret of winning an appeal. You need to show that it doesn't make sense to exclude you because your previous results don't accurately show what you're capable of academically. And you can't do that if you're trying to impress RMIT with pretty language or just being concise and trying to be professional. You have to work out and explain your case at the level of cause and effect, so the details of how problems you had led to lost marks. As I'll explain, this has to be in detail because detail is what makes it clear that the problems you had were the actual causes of poor performance. Detail also helps you show how a series of small changes in your life and study routine are going to lead to a big improvement in your grades. So if you want a strong appeal, write a draft with pages of detail about cause and effect on your studies. We can help with the look and feel of your letter, including your English expression. So please don't panic about this. It is serious, but don't panic and rush to lodge an appeal form to make yourself feel less anxious about the process, because you won't get a second chance if you make a mess of it. Don't panic and tell yourself that your transcript's somehow too bad or that your reasons for failing aren't going to be accepted by RMIT. RMIT does not judge students for having particular problems, for being sick, for having mental health difficulties. Take your time, think your case through, get help, and make sure that you have convincing evidence. Because what RMIT really cares about is whether a reasonable person should expect your academic performance to improve. And if there's been significant problems affecting your study, then significant positive change is also possible. So again, detail makes your case stronger. Now, before you rush to lodge an appeal, there are some important things you should do. And firstly, get help to deal with any problems you've been facing. If you've been struggling with depression, anxiety, or other signs of mental health problems, have this diagnosed by a doctor or a psychologist as soon as possible. The truth is that RMIT is supportive and flexible where students have a diagnosed mental health problem, so you boost your case by documenting these medical conditions. And starting to see a doctor, or if appropriate for you, going on medication, makes a proven difference to students' future academic performance. You should also plan how you will manage your overall well-being and make a clear plan for how you're going to proactively manage your studies. RMIT expects that students should work smarter. They don't want you to try and prove yourself by taking an overload or cutting out personal activities to study 24/7. In fact, the university knows that your ability to perform academically drops significantly when you're tired, stressed, distracted or disorganised. So being organised, including planning how you're going to look after yourself, can make a real difference to your ability to succeed and the strength of your case. Now, you should also look at whether you may be eligible to have fail grades removed from your transcript. Being at risk, which is the status that leads to exclusion, depends on there being fail results on your transcript. And if they're changed by the university, then it becomes easy to demonstrate that exclusion is unreasonable. Now, if you're seeking to have results removed, you do still need to lodge your exclusion appeal because it's a separate process. Now, fail grades can be reviewed through two different processes: special consideration as late withdrawal and remission of fees. They're both available where there's evidence of significant circumstances beyond your control that cause you to fail. And if you're an Australian government supported student and you've received an email telling you that you've lost the right to a helpline, a successful application for a remission is necessary to save your subsidised place. Making a successful application for these things requires evidence and it can be complicated. Now, there's information on our website about remissions and we can also help you with your application. Now, let's turn to writing your appeal. So, appeals are often quite complicated documents and it's quite common for it to be 5 to 10 pages. The resource pack on our website covers how to identify and explain problems which affected your study, supports available from the university and how you can believably address previous problems, planning your future study, and we have a section on sources of evidence, including what you can do when you feel like you've got no evidence. My hot tip is pay close attention to the first section of the pack about explaining why you failed. And this is why. So, in RMIT's eyes, you've been offered support and warned about continuing to fail. The time to show cause was your chance to contribute to an evidence-based review of your performance, and that means the time for promises or just saying that you'll try harder is gone. This is your last chance to prove that RMIT will be making a serious mistake if they excluded you. And that makes logic important, because your appeal needs to show that RMIT has really misunderstood the situation. And that's not going to work if it's unclear why you failed. If, on the other hand, there's a clear relationship between the problems you had and your grades, then it's not so reasonable to use those fails as proof that you can't pass. And you need to show that this is actually really the case. And that takes a lot of detail, because you do want to make sure that there's no confusion or logical space for other explanations. You also want to analyse the email explaining the reasons for your school's decision about your show cause submission. And check what your school said about against what you wrote. This will help you focus your case because it'll highlight where you might not have been clear and need to give more information in your appeal. Also, if your school's made a clear mistake, you should definitely explain this in the appeal and bring it to the attention of your student rights officer as an issue in your case. Now, I mentioned before, appeals need to meet grounds. So what are these things? Well, they're listed on the appeal form in full, but they are that there's evidence that exclusion is because of personal bias or ill will. There's evidence that there's been a breach of policy by your school. There's new relevant evidence which wasn't available at the time you were required to show cause, and there's evidence that exclusion will be excessive, unreasonable or inappropriate. you need to be aware that the University Appeals Committee checks whether your appeal has met the grounds of appeal before it's considered. And if it's not clear that your case and evidence meet the ground you've selected, it will be rejected. All of these grounds require you to have evidence. Now, if you don't have formal professional evidence at this stage, please don't assume that this means you can't make a case. It's quite a common situation. And what we found is that carefully mapping out how your problems affected your studies helps you figure out what other records you can draw on to show what was going on, or what you need to discuss with a doctor or a psychologist. So, on the form and on their website, RMIT gives examples of evidence that are actually very high quality government and professional records, things like death certificates. Now, those sorts of evidence are very helpful, but they are not the only evidence you can use. And the reason I say this is that university decisions are meant to be made on a reasonable balance of probability. And that means that you don't have to prove everything beyond doubt or with one document. And it also means that almost any record is actually evidence at some level. Now, obviously on its own, a bank statement, your timesheet from work, a draft assignment, your text messages or your social media posts, well, it may not seem to be that relevant. But when you start putting together those smaller pieces of evidence, you can build up a very strong picture of what's actually happened with your study. Before I move on, I need to give you a warning about that new evidence ground of appeal. In the University Appeals Committee's eyes, new evidence does not just mean evidence that hasn't been sent by RMIT yet. Appeals on this ground are rejected if there's any possibility that you could have provided the document earlier, because it's not available at the time of your show cause. So they will not apply the new evidence ground to things like now having a diagnosis for an untreated medical or mental health condition if you'd had symptoms and you didn't see a doctor straight away. Evidence that you didn't give your school because of general concerns about privacy or your family's reputation, or evidence that hasn't been seen by RMIT because you just missed the deadline to show cause. If you're trying to use the new evidence ground of appeal, your evidence must also document strong reasons why it wasn't possible to get it earlier. And all up, it's actually just better to avoid that ground of appeal. My suggestion is that when drafting your appeal, focus around that ground that it might be excessive, unreasonable, or inappropriate to exclude you. It's actually a helpful ground of appeal because it lets you focus on the significance of what the evidence you have is and your circumstances, and it helps you make the strongest logical case. Now look, excessive, unreasonable, or inappropriate are strong words, and they mean a lot more than just the decision's harsh or I want another chance. The best way to explain it to you is to say, think of it as meaning that a reasonable and logical decision maker who was following university policy and Australian law and looking at the evidence about your previous performance, the seriousness of what went wrong, how much control you had over it, and your current personal and academic situation, could not really decide that you should be excluded. And that could be for many reasons, but it's usually about how reasonable it would be to expect that you were able to fully devote yourself to your studies last semester, and also that you're going to continue to fail. This ground means that no matter what your personal medical circumstances were, it's still essential to prove that you've got support and that your studies are back on track. You don't want them assuming you're just going to continue to fail for other reasons. Now, the university's policies can actually help in grounding those arguments. The assessment policy, which governs exclusion, specifically requires that schools are supportive, inclusive and flexible, and it puts weight on allowing students to complete their programs and move into their careers. So when you thought your appeal through well, RMIT's rules will add a lot of strength to why a reasonable decision maker shouldn't exclude you. Now this brings me back to help from RUSU. So our team can give you a lot of assistance with your case, but you do give yourself the best chance of success when you come to us with a detailed written draft, because that lets us help you refine and strengthen your case against the ground of appeal. Don't worry if you haven't expressed things that well, or if your argument's not yet fully developed, because my team has a lot of experience in editing appeals and can really help strengthen your explanation of why the university shouldn't exclude you. But to do our best work, we do need detail about what happened and the relationship between your circumstances and your performance. So a strong case comes out of a partnership between you and RUSU. So please book in to see us when you've done the work of putting together that detailed framework about what's happened. Because the bottom line is that appeals win when they show exclusion isn't reasonable. And so it's hard to build up a logical case about that until that's been based on clear facts. Now, when you're ready to talk to us, it's easy to make an appointment. You can either come to one of our front counters, Bundoora, City, Brunswick or Carlton, or just send an email to student.rights@rmit.edu.au. You might need to give us a tiny bit of time to arrange an appointment, but we would love to help you be successful with your appeal. And I personally wish you good luck with it.